What if Acts 21 is warning us that a stop sign doesn't always mean stop? Today, we're looking at Acts chapter 21, and the thing that stood out to me more than anything was that a warning is not always a stop sign. I think a lot of us struggle with that. We assume that if God shows us there's struggles ahead, he must be telling us to turn around. But that's not what we see in Acts 21. Over and over, Paul is warned. The disciples at Tyre urge him not to continue. Agabus prophesies that he will be bound and handed over. His friends beg him to stay. But Paul continues to move forward, going toward Jerusalem. Here's the tension. Were these people hearing from God? I think they were. The Holy Spirit was showing them what was coming. But there's a difference between receiving a revelation and interpreting that revelation. The warning came from God, but the conclusion came from the people. They saw suffering and they naturally thought, don't go. But Paul saw the suffering and thought, prepare yourself. That's a huge difference. I think we still do this today. God begins to show us that something difficult is coming, a hard season, a sacrifice, a challenge, and we immediately assume it means stop. But what if it doesn't? What if God is preparing us for what's coming, not redirecting us from it? The thing that really stood out to me is how much Paul begins to look like Jesus in this chapter. Luke is intentionally drawing parallels here. Like Jesus walked toward Jerusalem knowing that suffering awaited him, Paul does the same. Jesus was warned, and so was Paul. Jesus was falsely accused. Paul was falsely accused. Jesus got handed over to the Gentiles. Guess what? Paul was too. The closer Paul follows Christ, the more his life begins to resemble Christ's life. And I think we often miss that. We love the idea of following Jesus when it leads to blessing. But discipleship means following Jesus even when it leads through hardship. Not because suffering saves us, but because obedience matters. There's another tension in this chapter that I found fascinating, the purification ritual. Paul agrees to participate in a Jewish purification ritual. Some commentators see this as completely appropriate, while others wonder if Paul was simply trying to keep peace with the people who questioned him. What stands out to me isn't necessarily whether the action was right or wrong. It's the question of motive. Because we can do the right thing for the wrong reason. We can stay quiet to avoid conflict. We can compromise our convictions to maintain relationships. We can seek peace when God is calling us to stand firm. And that's worth wrestling with. Not because I think Paul was compromising, but because I know how often we do. God isn't just concerned with what we do. He's also concerned with why we do it. Then everything falls apart. Paul goes to the temple. False accusations begin flying around. A riot starts. The crowd becomes violent. And once again, something remarkable happens. The very people who arrest Paul are the people who save his life. The Romans take him into custody. The crowd thinks that it's defeat. But God uses this arrest as protection. That stands out to me too, because God often uses things that looks like a setback to accomplish his purpose. The arrest wasn't the end of Paul's mission. It was transportation to Rome. The people trying to stop God's plan were actually moving it forward. Only God can do that. As I read this chapter, I couldn't help but think about my own life. There are times when I wish God would show me the whole picture. What comes next? Where does this road lead me? What happens after school? What happens after my ministry grows? What's going to happen 5 years from now? But then I wonder, if God showed me everything today, would I be overwhelmed by it? Would I be tempted to back away from it? Paul knew suffering was ahead, and he kept walking. That's the kind of faith I want. Not faith that follows God when it's easy, but faith that follows God when conviction is stronger than comfort. Acts 21 leaves us with the question, are we following comfort or are we following conviction? Because Paul wasn't following comfort. He was following the voice of God. And sometimes obedience means walking toward the very thing everyone else is telling you to avoid. A warning's not always a stop sign. Sometimes it is God's way of preparing you for the next step of obedience. Are you ready to walk in that obedience?